Young pregnant woman is found dead inside of a Milwaukee home.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
Just before midnight, on January 5, 2024, a quiet residential street in Wisconsin looked exactly the way it always did in winter. Cold. Still. Almost empty. Snow covered the sidewalks in thin, uneven layers, catching the orange and blue flashes of emergency lights as they bounced off parked cars and darkened windows. Smoke lifted slowly into the night air, drifting above rooftops while neighbors stood outside in silence, unsure where to look or what to say. At 12:01 a.m., firefighters moved fast toward a single-family home already filling with smoke. Their boots cut through slush. Radios crackled. Someone shouted instructions that barely carried over the sound of the fire. And then a scream broke through everything. A mother's voice, calling out a name she would keep calling long after the house was cleared. From inside, first responders carried out a young woman. She was limp. Unresponsive. Her body wrapped in emergency blankets that did nothing to hide how still she was. She was 22 years old. She was 5 months pregnant. She never woke up. Minutes later, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The house showed no signs of forced entry. No broken doors. No shattered windows. The fire hadn't come from outside. It started within the home. And the man who lived there was gone. Somewhere inside that same house, as smoke spread and flames grew, was a 3-year-old child. A little girl who, according to police, may have seen what happened to her mother before the fire ever started. Later, investigators would say something that made this night even harder to understand. They would say the victim may have already been dead before the fire began. So the question started almost immediately. Why was one bedroom locked for hours that day? Why did family members say they hadn't heard the young woman speak since the morning? Why did a simple family argument end with a gun being pulled, a house set on fire, and a pregnant woman dead? And how does a home filled with people become the place where no one could reach her in time? This is the story of a Wisconsin man living with his pregnant girlfriend's family, a night that unfolded minute by minute, and a series of choices that left a family searching for answers they may never fully get. And before this night was over, one question would hang over everything. What really happened behind that closed bedroom door? By early January 2024, the Johnson family home was the kind of place that ran on routine. It was a lived-in house, the kind where people knew which floorboards creaked, where coats piled up near the door, and where dinner smells could linger in the hallway long after the plates were cleared. In winter, the house would feel even tighter, with everyone spending more time indoors, sharing space whether they wanted to or not. From the outside, it was just another family home in Wisconsin. Inside, it was layered with relationships, responsibilities, and quiet tension that most families try to keep under control. This was a multi-generational household, built around the steady presence of Michelle Johnson, the mother who held the home together. Adult children came and went, sometimes stopping by, sometimes staying over, always moving through the house like it belonged to all of them, because in a way, it did. A 3-year-old granddaughter lived there full-time, filling the rooms with toys, noise, and the kind of innocent energy that makes adults lower their voices during arguments. In homes like this, everyone notices everything. A slammed door. A long silence. A mood shift at the dinner table. And then there was Cameron Washington, just 21 years old, living under the same roof as the family of his pregnant girlfriend, Gladys Johnson Ball. He wasn't a visitor. He wasn't someone dropping in for a weekend. He was part of the daily flow, sharing the same hallway, the same kitchen, the same air. The complaint suggests he depended on that home, not just for shelter, but for stability, and possibly for a sense of control he didn't want to lose. That's what makes cases like this hit harder. When danger comes from outside, people talk about locks and alarms. But when the threat is already inside the house, sitting in the next room, eating at the same table, it changes the meaning of safety. A familiar home can start to feel like a trap, and trust becomes the thing that gets used against you. Before her name appeared in police reports and news headlines, Gladys Johnson Ball was a 22-year-old young woman trying to manage a life that already carried more weight than most people her age. She was a mother to a 3-year-old daughter, a role that shaped how she moved through each day, from morning routines to bedtime rituals. At the same time, she was 5 months pregnant, carrying a second child while still learning how to balance her own needs with those of the people who depended on her. Her life was not defined by one moment, but by a series of quiet responsibilities that added up over time. Most days, Gladys' world centered around her child. Family members later described a routine that revolved around caregiving, shared meals, and helping where she could inside her mother's home. Living under Michelle Johnson's roof offered support, but it also meant limited privacy and constant awareness of how her relationship with Cameron Washington played out in front of others. Strain in that relationship was not hidden. It existed in the spaces between conversations, in disagreements that never fully settled, and in the tension that family members could sense without needing it explained. Pregnancy added another layer to that pressure. Gladys was physically vulnerable, emotionally stretched, and tied to a future that depended on stability she could not fully control. She relied on her family for shelter and help, while also trying to keep peace between the man she shared children with and the people who loved her most. That balance is fragile, and it asks a lot of someone still so young. There is something especially difficult about telling Gladys' story, because her voice is absent. She never gave a statement. She never explained how she felt in her own words. Everything known about her final days comes from observation, from what others noticed, and from what was missing when she suddenly went quiet. At 21 years old, Cameron Washington was already tied to Gladys' life in ways that could not be undone. He was the father of her 3-year-old daughter and the father of her unborn son, connections that bound him to the family even as stability remained out of reach. According to what later emerged, he did not have firm independence of his own. Living in the Johnson family home placed him in a position of reliance, both financially and emotionally, on people who were not his parents but had power over his daily life. Inside the house, Cameron's presence was constant. Family members would later describe behavior that appeared protective on the surface, but increasingly possessive in practice. Gladys' movements, conversations, and access to her family seemed to narrow over time. The distance did not happen all at once. It developed slowly, through moments where Cameron spoke for her, stood between her and others, or made decisions that did not invite discussion. This pattern matters because control is rarely loud at first. It often shows up as concern, as closeness, as wanting to keep someone near. But when that closeness turns into isolation, it creates tension that others can feel even if they cannot fully explain it. For Cameron, dependence on the household may have carried its own weight. Relying on Gladys' family for shelter while trying to assert authority within that same space is a conflict that can breed frustration and resentment. What investigators would later focus on is not a single argument, but a build-up. A young man with limited options, a growing family, and a deep attachment to a home that was not his to control. The fear of being told to leave, of losing access to Gladys and the children, hovered quietly in the background. And on January 5, that fear would move from unspoken tension to a moment that changed everything. On January 5, 2024, the last time anyone in the house saw Gladys Johnson Ball alive was around 11 a.m. It was not a dramatic moment. No argument. No warning. Just another morning inside a busy home where people moved in and out of rooms without keeping track of every step. As the day went on, though, something began to feel off. By the afternoon, family members noticed that Gladys had not come out of her bedroom. There was no sign of her usual movement, no voice, no response when her name was called. For a house that paid close attention to routine, the silence stood out. When relatives tried to check on her, they were stopped. The bedroom door stayed closed, and Cameron Washington positioned himself as the barrier between Gladys and everyone else. As evening settled in, concern turned into unease. At 8:40 p.m., a food delivery arrived, and family members used that moment to knock again, asking to see Gladys. Cameron refused. He did not open the door. Instead, he spoke for her, answering questions that were never meant for him. He told them she was sleeping and should not be disturbed. It was a small detail, but one that would later feel impossible to ignore. A pregnant woman had not been seen or heard from all day, and yet no one was allowed to check on her. The question lingered in that hallway long before anyone understood how serious it truly was. From the perspective of Gladys' sister, the silence became impossible to ignore. She had tried multiple times throughout the day to speak with Gladys, calling out to her through the door and asking Cameron to let her check in. Each attempt ended the same way, with no response from Gladys herself. Hours passed, and the quiet stretched longer than it ever had before. Cameron continued to offer explanations that sounded calm on the surface. He told the family that, "Mommy's sleeping," using a tone that suggested concern but not urgency. There was no rush in his voice, no sign that something might be wrong. To those listening, the words felt strange. Sleeping did not explain an entire day without movement or sound, especially in a house where Gladys was rarely alone. Then came a moment that unsettled everyone. Cameron, still inside the bedroom, began pretending to speak to Gladys, as if carrying on a conversation meant to reassure the family outside the door. They listened closely, waiting to hear her answer. She never did. No voice came back. No sound followed. That absence spoke louder than anything else. The longer the door stayed closed, the more the fear grew. What began as worry started to turn into something heavier, something harder to name. By that point, the possibility that Gladys could no longer respond was already hanging in the air, even if no one was ready to say it out loud. As the tension reached a breaking point, Michelle Johnson stepped in. After hours of unanswered questions and mounting fear, she made a decision that shifted everything. She told Cameron Washington to leave the house. It was a clear boundary, and it came from someone who had the authority to enforce it. The reaction was immediate. Cameron became visibly upset, and the situation escalated quickly. What had been a tense standoff in the hallway turned into something far more dangerous in a matter of moments. According to police, Cameron pulled out a firearm, changing the tone of the night entirely. He pointed the gun at several family members, turning fear into panic. The house erupted into chaos. Family members ran, trying to get away from him and protect themselves. Michelle retreated to her bedroom, locking the door and barricading herself inside, knowing the danger was no longer just emotional. From that moment on, this was not a family argument or a misunderstanding. It was a situation where lives felt immediately at risk. This moment marked a clear shift. Whatever had been happening behind the closed bedroom door was now spilling into the rest of the house. The sense of safety that once defined the home was gone, replaced by fear moving room to room. The threat was no longer imagined. It was real, and it was inside the house. While Michelle Johnson was still on the phone with 911, something new cut through the fear. She smelled smoke. It wasn't strong at first, but it was enough to make her stop and listen, to realize that the danger inside the house was changing shape. Moments later, she saw Cameron Washington running out the front door, moving fast as smoke began to spread through the home behind him. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was already filling with smoke. Inside, they found Gladys Johnson Ball unconscious in her bedroom. Michelle carried her daughter out herself, driven by instinct and desperation, refusing to wait while the fire grew. Outside, first responders took over, laying Gladys on the ground as neighbors watched in stunned silence. They tried everything they could. CPR was started. Oxygen was given. Time felt slow and fast at the same moment. But just minutes after midnight, Gladys was pronounced dead. In the cold Wisconsin night, a mother held her daughter, surrounded by flashing lights, knowing that nothing could bring her back. As first responders examined Gladys Johnson Ball, they began to notice injuries that did not match a house fire alone. There was bruising and redness on her arms, neck, shoulders, and face, along with a bloody nose and petechiae visible in one eye, details that immediately raised concern. One responder made a critical observation. Gladys' body was cold to the touch, suggesting she may have been dead for hours before the fire ever started. That single detail changed how the night was understood. If the fire did not cause her death, then its purpose came into question. It forced investigators to ask a chilling possibility. If Gladys was already gone, what was the fire meant to erase? Inside that house was Gladys' 3-year-old daughter, a child too young to understand the full weight of what was happening, yet present during moments that would later haunt the investigation. Police believe she may have seen what happened to her mother, a possibility that added another layer of gravity to the case. No details about what the child may have witnessed have been shared publicly, a decision rooted in protection and care. That silence carries its own weight. In cases like this, the smallest person in the room can hold the clearest memory. And sometimes, the truth exists in a place that words are never meant to reach. Not long after the fire, Cameron Washington was found by police a short distance from the house. He had not gone far. There was no chase across neighborhoods, no attempt to disappear into the night. He was simply there, close enough to still see the glow of emergency lights behind him. When officers searched him, they found a lighter in his pants pocket, a small object that immediately took on heavy meaning. Cameron showed no visible injuries, a sharp contrast to the condition of Gladys. The detail stood out. It felt less like an escape and more like a pause, almost as if he expected that this moment was coming. The autopsy that followed confirmed what first responders had already suspected. Gladys Johnson Ball had injuries consistent with violence, along with signs of asphyxia, details that pointed away from an accidental death. Yet despite those findings, the medical examiner could not determine an official cause or manner of death. That uncertainty left the case suspended in a painful space. A young woman was dead, but her death carried no legal label. Without that final determination, the story remained unfinished, caught between what was known and what could be proven. In that gap, questions continued to grow, unanswered and unresolved. In the days that followed, prosecutors filed charges against Cameron Washington. He was accused of arson, 5 counts of reckless endangerment, and intentionally pointing a firearm at a person. Each charge reflected a piece of what happened that night, but none of them directly addressed Gladys' death. What was missing mattered. There was no homicide charge. Despite the injuries, the fire, and the unanswered questions, the law stopped short of naming her death as a murder. A judge later set Cameron's bond at $200,000, and he was taken into custody at the Milwaukee County Jail, where he remained as the case moved forward, incomplete and unsettled. Even after the charges were filed, the most important questions remained unanswered. What happened behind the bedroom door, and when did Gladys actually die? Why was access blocked all day, and how much of that silence was driven by fear? Control, isolation, and escalation now define the gaps in this story. This case forces a hard look at domestic violence inside shared homes, where danger does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it blends into routine, hiding behind closed doors and familiar faces. Pregnancy can deepen that risk, increasing vulnerability while tightening control around a person who already has fewer options. When everything finally falls apart, the questions come too late. How many warning signs were present, and how many were dismissed as normal family tension? And what happens when silence is mistaken for peace? Today, the house on that quiet Wisconsin street still stands. The fire damage has been repaired, the walls repainted, but the feeling of safety it once held is gone. Inside that home, a child will grow older, carrying memories she may not fully understand, while a mother is left with questions no repair can fix. A man has been charged. A young woman is dead. And a child may remember more than anyone ever wanted her to. This case does not end with certainty, only with absence. When a life ends before anyone hears the truth, where does justice begin? And don't forget to subscribe to stay notified of future episodes where we'll uncover more real-life crime stories, exploring the complexity of human nature and the consequences of our actions.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.